What's something you saw coming miles away that a lot of people didn't? The October 2018 stock market crash. Not me, but someone near me. I was driving out to my college one morning and came up to a light. I had to turn left, but there was no arrow, so I had to yield to the other person and wait for them to go first when the light turned green. Except they weren't going. I waited a few seconds, then waved them through. I looked at the driver, and it was this really peaceful-looking old lady with a smug-ass look on her face. Like the perfect, "I've been in this world way longer than you, grandma" type. She just nodded at me and put a palm up as to say, "Wait." And at that moment, a massive truck came barreling through the intersection. I guess its brakes malfunctioned, but that smug grandma saved my frickin' life. Last night, when I was leaving a bar with some friends, there was a lady stumbling around in a parking lot pretty aimlessly. One friend asked, "What's that lady doing?" I replied that she was looking for a spot to pee. 3 minutes later, that lady squats down and takes a pee. I called it. The taxi industry collapsing, at least in Australia. They have been consistently offering a terrible service for many years, ripping off customers and exploiting every possible loophole, and as soon as a competitor came along, i.e. Uber, they all threw their hands in the air like they were the victims. It was always going to happen. Not everyone thought so, but I saw it happening many years ago. In Germany, the taxi companies got together and got Uber banned. In Brazil, taxi drivers got together and beat the crap out of some Uber drivers for a while. We had a leaking high-pressure airline at the factory I work at. Production environment. So everything is frick all compared to parts coming out. We went out at night and patched it. The next morning they said that we needed to dig it up and have all the new lines laid out next to it so that we can swap it over lunch. I told him there was no way because I needed to get a contractor out to scan underground for other conduits. Disclaimer, we knew for a fact that there was no gas or electric lines where we dug. Well, while digging, in the first hour, the backhoe broke the line in half. Called it. Then we broke a water line. Called it. Then a 14-inch sewer line. Called it. Then the internet cable. Called it. Then factory communication line. Called it. Just finished that job with over 200 hours of holiday overtime. That'll teach them. Now to get communication contractors out on a holiday weekend. No Man's Sky being a complete turd on delivery. Twinkies coming back. After Hostess went bankrupt and stopped production, people started freaking out and saying it was the end of Twinkies. But anyone who stopped to think for 5 seconds knew the brand would be sold off to another company and would take over. Sure enough, they returned to stores a few months later. Company I used to work for placed the biggest idiot in management as the new CEO. Upon hearing the news, I said that the company would be bankrupt in 4 years. It was actually bankrupt in 3 years and a few months, so I missed it by a little. My first 2 jobs going out of business. My last day working at a video rental store, circa 2004, I said, "We're either going to be replaced by the internet or machines." I was wrong because it turned out to be both, i.e. Redbox and Netflix streaming. But I knew our brick-and-mortar days were over. Good riddance. Borders books. As the holiday season was approaching and we were setting up the store for Christmas and Black Friday, one of the cash registers broke down. No big deal normally, we would call corporate and someone drives out from Los Angeles the same day with a new machine because it is in the corporate's interest that we are able to efficiently take money from people who are trying to give it to us. Corporate refused. That's when I knew that we would be out of business after the holiday season. Sure enough. The Affair of General Petraeus and Paula Broadwell. When she released her book, Jon Stewart had her as a guest on The Daily Show. I happened to get tickets to that show. The way she talked about him and how she tried so hard to describe their platonic, professional relationship, I knew. Like a douche, I turned to my friends and said, "She got that D." Later that year, crap hit the fan. So this won't be too well known to people who don't work in the IT industry, but I actually called the Lenovo/Superfish scandal the moment I saw it on the computer. Superfish was a program, a piece of malware that was pre-installed on a lot of Lenovo computers a few years ago. It was collecting user data and forwarding that data to a third party. The moment I saw it listed in the programs on a new Lenovo that I was setting up for a client, I had my suspicions. When I was installing their AV, it ran a scan as a sort of baseline thing, and it flagged Superfish almost immediately as being a potential threat, so I removed it and finished setting it up. I removed Superfish from every computer I saw on it. I do admit it took me a bit to realize it was only on Lenovo's, and recommended to my coworkers to do the same. A couple of weeks after the first time we saw it, news came out that it was malware and should be removed immediately. It's one of the only times I ever got to say "I told you so" to my coworkers because I was the least experienced there, and I felt pretty proud of myself for having that foresight. It was really frustrating to deal with the people that would come in after the news broke accusing us of allowing this to happen. How could you sell me a computer that has viruses on it? Well, for those who came to us, the service department, we didn't. We removed it. Secondly, why would anyone ever suspect a manufacturer of allowing malware to be preloaded onto the machines? My coworkers thought I was nuts for thinking that, and the only reason they complied with my suggestion was that it did no harm to remove it. So yeah, I called Superfish, and I think I deserve a cookie for my minute contribution. The housing crisis. I didn't know the extent of what would happen and how deep it went, but when people making $30K a year were buying 7 or 8 houses at a time to flip them within a couple of months, I knew something had to give. I'll never forget this guy in a grocery store talking excitedly about how the housing boom would never stop and wondering how people could be so naive. Or when the cashier said that she was going to get her real estate license. Sort of like the shoe shine boy talked about buying stocks in September of 1929. Donald Trump actually becoming president. My brother-in-law going to jail for selling drugs. Everybody knew about his painkiller addiction, but somehow I was the only one aware of his unlawful buying and selling of them. 3D TV fad going away. I tried it out at my friend's place, and while it was kinda cool, it felt gimmicky, like something to try but not use regularly. Yeah, 3D is a flop, but I read somewhere that the reason why entertainment companies produced 3D movies was to force theaters to upgrade their system to digital. That way they did not have to pay $8K for the rolls anymore as everything became digital. My recovery from cancer. On paper it looked horrible, 5% chance of survival, but I just had this gut feeling I would be fine. And here I am almost 2 years later, good as can be. Years ago, a friend got a puppy, and I came over to see her one day. While we were in the living room, the puppy was wandering around sniffing about, and my immediate thought was, it's sniffing for a crap spot. I tell my friend that, and she's like, nah, he's just curious about the house. He's exploring. I tell her I'm absolutely sure he's going to crap, and she'd better take him to the corner of the kitchen that's got a load of newspaper on the floor. But again, she's like, oh, it's fine. Not 5 seconds after she ignores me, the puppy takes a huge crap that was almost half its size on the carpet. She's freaking out and runs to grab it and take it outside, but the damage is done. I was pretty impressed by the size of that crap though. What the hell did it eat? Now that we live in the future, all ice cream is in fact Dippin' Dots. I have the unfortunate distinction of being 3 out of 3 on calling divorces in my friend circle. As somebody who made all the wrong decisions with my first girlfriend, I can smell insecurity and fear-driven decisions from a mile away. So when certain couples get married for the wrong reason, I can usually see it when others can't, because I recognize all the same mistakes I made. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to be popular. I'll list some things I look out for based on my experience. 1. Trying to fix somebody. I got into a relationship with my first girlfriend because I tried to fix her problems and be the knight in shining armor as I rescued Milady from her problems. It doesn't matter if the male or female is doing the rescuing. It usually doesn't end well. 2. Socioeconomics matter. I know we are only supposed to focus on the love aspect, but how a person was brought up can cause points of friction. One of the couples I called was a marriage between a wealthy girl and a middle-class guy. She never ever had to worry about money, but he always had to budget. For some reason, they never discussed money beforehand, and when they married, and she expected a nice house, he couldn't deliver. She legitimately thought he didn't love her, or else he would buy her a house. I knew she wanted this, and I knew he couldn't deliver. Yet he was so afraid to lose her that he just hoped the gods of love would solve his problem. 3. Which brings me to my last red flag, not discussing in detail how they expect their lives to pan out. It doesn't matter if the plan actually works, but getting an understanding of where your life partner stands is key. All 3 out of 3 couples never discuss things like what kind of a house they want, how many kids, who will take care of the aging parents, etc. A few expensive divorces later, this is what all my buddies said they wish they would do. This is not a complete list, of course, as other subtleties matter, but usually any one of these glaring red flags is a sign that things aren't so dandy. Star Wars Battlefront 2015 being a hollow shell of a game that was nothing like its predecessors. The Iceland travel boom. That Mars One initiative has no future and is possibly a scam, funding what needs to be an international multi-billion space adventure with advertising sales on a reality show. Get the F out of here. Superman vs. Batman getting crucified by the critics. My wife and I predicted the 2008 housing bubble. We sold an investment property that we believed had become overvalued for the area and used the proceeds to buy 2 new properties. A year later, that property we sold was in foreclosure. Did the same with my grandmother's house. It was an absolute trash heap and required tens of thousands of repairs. We figured the market was never going to be better and sold it as is for over $100K. That was in early 2007. By the time the purchaser finished repairs and resold it, the local market was in the toilet. I think they resold it for $110K or something. It was excellent timing. Minecraft being one of the most popular video games of all time. Brexit. The Stay campaign was so disorganized and late to the game, then they campaigned in a fashion that implied the UK would be fine out of the Union, but better if they stayed. Nobody seemed eager to jog people's memory of why the UK joined in the first place. Now the nation of shopkeepers have no market. The continental system is going to work. In 2020, everything will be futuristic because every cyberpunk/sci-fi novel plot starts out in the 2020s. The upcoming tech bubble burst. All those unicorn companies making no real money, but getting $1 billion+ valuations with insanely overpriced stock. My friend's divorce. They had sex. The pastor found out and got angry. They decided to get married at 18. Everyone going on how they would be together. I kept my mouth shut the whole time, but come on, people. The backlash against Bill Nye. He used to guest host Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast, and he would use the same condescending attitude that he does in his Netflix show. Really turned me off to him. Tyson and Bill are trying to follow in the footsteps of Carl Sagan. Their mistake is in their delivery. Sagan always explained things as if he was discovering something for the first time, and in doing so invited you to join him in the wonder and curiosity of it all. Tyson and Bill explain things as if you're an adversarial plebe who needs it explained to you, and they are the benevolent scientists there to enlighten you. Granted, the political climate of today and Sagan's day are very different, and I believe that has an effect on this. I remember vividly during the 9/11 attacks, my dad said, "The awful thing is, everyone around there is fricked because of the amount of asbestos that's probably in those buildings." He's a structural engineer. Now there are concerns that the number of deaths due to asbestos dust inhalation may be greater than the number of people initially killed. I remember reading about people saying that the air smelled like burnt oven mitt for weeks afterward, and I thought, doesn't anyone realize that you're all breathing right now? Uber. When smartphones became a thing and Apple was doing the "there's an app for that" commercials, I was traveling a lot for work, and I thought that it would be awesome if someone could come up with an app to call a cab to your location. Even talked about it with my friends, and wrote up plans. Thought about integrating GPS so that you would always know how much the ride was going to cost, which was always a pain in traditional cabs if you were on a budget. Then I just kind of forgot about it until Uber showed up, and I was like, damn, that could have been mine. The Steam box being a huge failure, and Valve not being a developer of video games anymore. In 2006, I wrote my final paper on my macro econ class about the home loan industry, and it would be better for everyone if brokers were paid on loans they closed as an annuity that grew over time, giving them a vested interest in making sure their clients paid on their loans. My conclusion was that the instant gratification of being paid at the close of escrow, easy access to money, and predatory loan brokers would cause the housing market to crash. My professor gave me a B, saying that it was an excellent paper, but the premise was flawed. People should be paid what they are entitled to, and the Fed would never let that happen. In 2009, that same professor contacted me via Facebook to apologize. Johnny Manziel being a bust. The war in Iraq. How anybody thought we were doing anything but posturing to invade is beyond me. The media fed us the narrative given to them by the government, and Americans ate it up like it was true. The search for WMDs was a snipe hunt in reverse. I was the reverse in some sense. I was in elementary school when the war started, but my parents would always listen to the news in the car on the way to school, and I'd passively absorb it. And I remember hearing for a long time about Afghanistan, and then all of a sudden we were at war with Iraq. I was super confused. For a long time, I thought my confusion was just a result of having been in elementary school at the time, but years later I read a book about the decision to go to war with Iraq, and the rapidity of the pivot would have justified confusion even for an adult. Lance Armstrong doping. Pro cycling was/is known to be chock full of dopers, and this guy was consistently outperforming the rest of the pack, including some/many cheaters. On top of that, anabolic steroids are well known to cause nasty side effects like testicular cancer. But try to tell someone that this great American hero who overcame adversity was a fraud, and they'd treat you like you were unsympathetic to cancer survivors and insufficiently patriotic. Tesla being a massive success. NSA spying. Knew about it more than a decade ago, but of course, it was a conspiracy theory. I also saw Trump winning. Once Bernie was cheated out of the nomination, knew Clinton had no shot. Seriously, people casually joked about NSA spying years ago. Then, when it was leaked, everyone lost their crap. I went to college for mining engineering. When I was doing interviews for internships, one of the companies I interviewed with was Peabody Energy. Now at this time, Peabody was the largest coal company in the world and was one of those annoying companies that thought they were so awesome that they basically wanted you to sit there and beg them to hire you. Anyways, during my interview, they asked what I saw as the biggest challenge to Peabody Energy. I told them that since they only mined coal and were not diversified into other minerals like other large mining companies, if something happened to the coal market, it would be hard for the company to survive it. The smug guy doing the interview acted like that was the dumbest thing he had ever heard and told me their focus on coal is what made the company strong. 5 years later, the coal market falls apart. Peabody goes bankrupt and their stock BTU becomes so worthless that they kicked it off the New York Stock Exchange. Online card shops where you can print your own messages and get them posted. Genuinely, I thought of that about 15 years ago when I worked in a print shop. Did nothing about it because that's how I roll. Well, this isn't a specific thing, but a class of things. I'm consistently befuddled as to why people don't realize that someone has lied to them once and will likely lie to them again. Spain crashing out of the 2014 World Cup group stages. Got laughed at when I said Netherlands and Chile would both beat them. Not that I can gloat that much being English though. Heelys. This was years ago, but as a kid I randomly heard of them about a year before they became massively popular in the UK. I wanted them for a long time, but whoever I told laughed at me. I was too bitter to want them when they got popular. I managed to get over the injustice of it all eventually. Fidget spinner popularity. Coworkers thought it and the fidget cube were stupid. When I first saw Winter's Bone, I said, that girl is going to be a star. When I was in high school, my theater teacher once told me that a gun on the set will always be fired by the final act, in relation to intent in set design. Some years later, my mom and I went to see a play and I noticed a curious set of 2 swords set above the doorway on the stage, and I turned to my mom and said, I will bet $50 that there's a sword fight with those 2 exact swords later. She accepted. Around the 4th act, 2 characters were in a heated argument and eventually did run to the doorframe to grab the swords and duel. I can still remember the grin I gave my mom while it happened to this day. The impending collapse of the student loan market. Don't say I didn't tell you so. What do you think happens if there's a student loan bust? Do millions of kids get their credit ruined? Does the government forgive it? I feel like forgiving the loans makes a lot of sense since it's something like over 60% not paying them. The government stops giving loans or severely caps them, which I assume would force colleges to lower tuition costs. That my father was cheating on my mom? That was fun. Me too. My dad kept lying to her and convincing her he wasn't and would never. Anyways, I called that number for my mom. The person didn't answer. I left a calm message explaining that I was his daughter and that he's been married for over 30 years. Anyways, the next day my dad is crying and refused to ever talk to me again. Not me, but my dad. He saw Donald Trump in the running against 20 other Republicans and a smaller group of Democrats at the way beginning of the election. He said it'll be Trump versus Hillary, and that Trump will be president. Everyone thought he was crazy. He bet on it with some people and made money. Golden State Warriors winning the finals 2 years ago. Good my mate who sells gambling tips online to put them down as his dark horse pick. Cavs was my main pick. He laughed at me. They were paying 33-1 before the season began. I put $100 in them, and I still laugh at him today. The uprising of 3D printers. I remember talking about this with my friends at least 15 years ago. I was telling anyone within earshot in 2002 that the Iraq War would be a massive disaster, that we would take 10 years or more to set up a flimsy democracy. At the time, matter of months was a common prediction, and it would collapse immediately after we inevitably withdraw. In retrospect, I was probably a bit naive and optimistic about just how damaging that power void would be. I didn't see ISIS becoming nearly this big. But in retrospect, I think it's only as big as it is by franchising some of Al-Qaeda's practices and getting state backing in Saudi Arabia, as Al-Qaeda did in Pakistan. For the record, Afghanistan is also a disaster in waiting, and will never be a stable democracy, though the collapse there would be less consequential if only because of its relative isolation. The need for some way to indicate sarcasm on the internet. The ending of Shutter Island. For Christ's sake, how did nobody predict that one? A new Assassin's Creed game. Ubisoft has to milk the series some more. My prediction that I see coming that most people don't is that when Level 5 automated vehicles are achieved, it will be a short transition to manually driven vehicles being relegated to private property use only, like quads and snowmobiles. Insurance for manually driven vehicles will skyrocket, and cities will even ban them outright in favor of a faster yet safer flow of traffic. This will result in the loss of many jobs, not just cabbies and truck drivers, but also emergency responders, traffic enforcement officers, dispatchers, etc. Without new laws, police will be able to stop and search your vehicle without reasonable cause or evidence if no one is present inside it. Smugglers will be able to avoid arrest by having no driver in their stolen and hacked vehicles. Plus, they will become much less conspicuous than some paranoid driver making stupid mistakes. Most people won't own an automated vehicle. There will be some combination of a public/community-based and private Uber-like service that will probably be subscription-based. Private ownership will rapidly become rare. The one thing I don't know how it will all fit in is motorcycle. They may need separate lanes like bike paths. It would be hard to fight to make them operate on private property only. VR is going to flop. It will never be for gaming. It will only ever be for experiences. It will never be mainstream. The car market 100% is going to crash. Quote me on it. People still sucking at technology. The adults around me had this weird perception that my generation would intuitively know how to use computers and other technology. I teach kids who were born in the late 90s/early 2000s. Trust me, the ability to use Snapchat doesn't mean that the kid is good with technology. The majority of the people I deal with, adults and kids, can't figure out how to send an email with an attachment. It's painful. I consider myself an inept user of technology, don't get me wrong, but hell, we have Google. We have YouTube. If you don't know something, look it up. Use a little common sense. It doesn't matter if it's a college website. If it says that Spaniards were colonizing South America in the 900s, it's wrong and you shouldn't cite it in your presentation. When I first heard about Theranos, I knew there was something either revolutionary or completely bunk. I started looking into them since I worked in lab medicine, and after looking through their background, I thought they couldn't possibly live up to their hype. No one believed me outside of my lab, even my friends from medical school. They were lured into this fantasy Theranos created. Anyway, I was glad when Theranos was exposed, since it was just misleading people. In the year 2006, my first year of college, we were asked to come up with any kind of new business. Not new, but I talked about watching channels without any commercials. My professor laughed it off, saying I didn't know how channels made money with commercials. I responded that we would charge them weekly for a price for not showing commercials. He thought I was being an idiot and gave me a C for the project. And boom, Netflix. The massive price spikes and shortages of firearms and ammo after Sandy Hook. I was planning on buying 2 new rifles for a while. The day that happened, I immediately bought them for $550 and $650. Also bought more ammo. Weeks later, those same guns were north of $1,000 and ammo doubled or tripled. That is, if you could find anything. Stayed that way for like a year. The exit for Disney World. The rest in the car didn't see it until we were almost there. Not me, but this is what made me want to become a data scientist. Worked in the transport sector, and we had this crazy genius of a data analyst who would produce sector-wide reports for transport every quarter. I got to go to one of the presentations, and it blew my mind. The only sector I remember clearly was trucking. Our analyst explained that with an increase in demand for lumber, heavier loads would be put onto trucks without an increase in maintenance, without further education or government intervention, which he was recommending. The heavier loads would further wear down braking systems. If untouched, he estimated we would see an increase in accidents and fatalities. His advice was not put into action. Literally a month later, we had the most truckers die in 1 month than in the last 3 years combined. The worst thing about this story is that they fired this analyst because he wouldn't conform to the simple data models our lead and the higher manager wanted in place. This guy was literally predicting the future, but because they couldn't wrap their heads around the data and couldn't get him to conform, they let him go. Such a waste. Winds of winter being delayed. Stop being gullible, guys. 3D printed guns. I was talking about it quite a bit about a year before they really started taking off, and everyone insisted it would be much further off. Snape was working with Dumbledore all along. One of Dumbledore's famous quotes is, "To the well-prepared mind, death is but the next great adventure." What had he been doing all through Book 6? Preparing. He wasn't begging Snape for his life at the end, he was begging him to make it quick. I can remember being a kid in the late 80s and hearing stories about how the government is going to implant computer chips on us so that they can spy on us. I remember thinking how stupid that was because how could they do that without us knowing? Flash forward to today and everybody has one in their pocket. I knew that King Arthur would bomb at the box office. Apparently no one in Hollywood saw that coming. Renewable energy. CDs. When they first came out in the 80s, they were very expensive, but I started collecting them instead of vinyl. Friends said I was nuts because these things are never going to catch on, but I insisted they would be the future. At least for the next 20 years, they were. Guess now everybody is streaming and people are starting to collect vinyl again, and my friends from back then get the last laugh. I also ran in the 80s and did a lot of sports before running and jogging and exercise became a thing. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have an example you'd like to give, please do so in the comments below. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time!